The purpose of this chapter is to help you identify and understand what depression is and how it works, and help dispel some myths about depression that could lead you into a blind alley. If you're going to focus your energy on getting on top of your depression, we want to help you zero in on the strategies that will give you the biggest bang for your buck. You'll learn to realize symptoms of depression. You'll learn to recognize symptoms of depression and understand their positive and negative impacts in your life. When you begin to understand the way depression affects your life, you can take a slow, deep breath of fresh air and see new options for addressing your challenging circumstances. The ACT perspective. Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, ACT, offers a new view of depression, suggests that there's something in the water supply of your social upbringing that sets you up for your depression. Particularly when you face challenging life situations. Perhaps you've been trained to believe that the goal in such situations is to be strong and not allow yourself to feel any pain. Worse yet, maybe you've learned that having negative emotions such as sadness, guilt, anger, or fear is a sign that you aren't healthy. This type of message puts you at odds with the way you feel in a situation after the situation. Perhaps you've fallen into the habit of avoiding troublesome situations in your life in the hope that they'll just go away and then you'll feel better again. But depression doesn't arise in a vacuum, and the fact that it's present in your life is a signal that something isn't working quite right. Consider this: perhaps avoiding problems in your marriage, family, job, or health doesn't make the problem go away and makes the situation worse. If you don't address important problems in an intimate relationship, you may feel less connected to your partner and start to drift away. As things get worse, your depression will deepen and you may begin to avoid other problems, like the fact that you're feeling less and less intimate with your partner. Likewise, if your job is unfulfilling and your approach is to not think about the fact that your work is losing its meaning, avoidance of the problem can just make your work less interesting and eventually drag down your sense of accomplishment. That's a good one for my parents, too. Or if you have a risky health habit like smoking, drinking too much, or being too reliant on drugs, simply turning your back on the problem doesn't make it less risky. In all of these situations, somewhere in your mind you remain aware that you aren't dealing with the problem that is detracting from your sense of who you are. Even if it's unintentional, falling into a pattern of avoiding unpleasant feelings or painful feelings and the situations that trigger them is a major cause of depression. Think about the life circumstances that surround your experience of depression. Then consider this information from an eagle's eye view, in which you can take many steps back and ask yourself the following questions. If your depression is telling you something about your current life situation, what is the message? Is it possible that depression is protecting you from having to feel the emotional pain you otherwise would endure if you turned around and faced the music? Is it possible for the very behaviors you use to keep your mood in check are actually increasing your depression? For a moment, simply consider this possibility. The first step is the journey to a vital life. The first step in the journey to a vital life is to begin asking unusual questions that often produce confusing answers. However, confusion would be a good sign just now, because the very things you think might help your situation could, in fact, be doing just the opposite. For example, even though you might protect yourself from a conflict with your partner by not discussing dissatisfactions with the relationship, this just allows the problem in the relationship to grow and fester. Like the range of meanings for the word, the experience of depression varies significantly from person to person. However, there are common aspects that form the basis for our definition of depression. We think of depression as a period of life constriction, much like being in a low-pressure area in one's life. Life constriction means that you aren't succeeding in making your life what you would like it to be. Your life isn't producing the sense of vitality, purpose, and meaning that you hoped it would. As you expend more and more of your energy dealing with the symptoms of depression, you have less and less energy to devote to other areas of your life. As a result, your life pursuits begin to shrink and cope and become compressed. Compared to the opinions that are actually available to you, your pursuits become increasingly restricted in number and scope. That is what we call depression compression. Humans behave differently when living in depression compression. Depressed people complain not only of sadness but also a sense of numbness and detachment. Pursuing fundamental activities of living in many realms, such as relationship, health, work, and play, seem less important. Less necessary. It's as if you're hiking blindfold. Even though you keep moving your feet, you can't see your destination and therefore have no sense of direction. You also can't see the obstacles and thus they go undetected and ignored, and all too easily become stumbling blocks. Amanda's situation serves as a good illustration of living in depression compression. This is Amanda's story. Amanda, a 27-year-old unmarried bank executive, has struggled with depression since early adolescence. She was overweight even as a child and was often teased by kids at school. In high school, she was a good student but didn't have many friends and never dated. She felt ashamed of the way she looked and pushed away boys who expressed an interest in her. She described her high school years as awful and painful to the core. She felt that other students talked about her behind her back and made fun of her weight. In college, she tended to steer away from social settings and continued to gain weight. Her efforts to create a sense of comfort and pleasure centered on cooking and eating, and she tipped the scales at over 200 pounds by the time she was 25. She met a man in a cooking class, and they dated for 6 months and eventually had intimate relations. Hope so after 6 months. Amanda was devastated when he abruptly terminated their relationship soon after their intimacy started. She'd felt she'd made herself vulnerable and that she'd been exploited. She was sure he had been turned off by how she looked naked, and she vowed to never be hurt by a man again. She continued to gain weight, and physical activity became increasingly uncomfortable for her. At age 27, she was diagnosed with diabetes, and her depression spiraled out of control. She overdosed on medication one night, hoping to go to sleep forever, and woke up in the emergency room. That's so sad. The ER physician prescribed an antidepressant, which Amanda took for several months after a follow-up visit with her family doctor. Although she noticed some improvements in her energy and her sleep, she still felt depressed and continued to avoid social activities except those required by her work.